You know, they said Prince Andrew was literally about to move out of Royal Lodge. Guess what? He doesn't have to move out until October next year. Yes, you read that correctly. You heard that correctly, I should say. This is Tom Sykes, the Royalist, back after a lovely Thanksgiving break. I hope you all enjoyed a fantastic Thanksgiving. I think Prince Andrew had a pretty nice Thanksgiving as well in his lovely 30-room mansion, Royal Lodge in Windsor, which it now transpires he doesn't have to leave until October next year. It's really incredible when you think about this story, this scandal, this debacle, this farce, whatever you want to call it, of Prince Andrew. I think there are two distinct strands to think about here. One is Prince Andrew's behavior, which is clearly completely unacceptable, completely beyond the pale, has arguably led to the suicide of a woman in Australia, Virginia Giuffre, who alleged that she was forced to have sex with Andrew when she was 17. She was definitely abused by Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew, of course, denies all those charges. That's one thing, what Andrew did. In the other column, we have to look at how the royal family have responded to this. Now, as people who watch this channel know, there's been a sort of fashion started, in fact, by King Charles's camp itself, or at least King Charles's camp certainly jumped on the bandwagon to blame it all on the Queen, right? To say the Queen knew all about Andrew's behaviour, the Queen enabled it, the Queen paid all the settlements, the Queen did this, did that, did the other. And even I noticed David Dimbleby is taking this line in his new documentary that he's doing for the BBC, saying that the Queen made a mistake by allowing Andrew to walk her into the memorial for her husband, etc., etc., etc. Look, I've got to say that as everybody who watches this channel, who has been following my Substack, who's been reading me on the Daily Beast knows, I don't completely reject that allegation, right? I don't suggest that the Queen did everything absolutely perfectly, but just taking a step back from it, what is clear is that the settlement that the Queen handed Charles when he came to the throne was largely tolerated by the British public. And the situation we are in now is very clearly not tolerated by the British public. In fact, you can even see this. There's a campaign by people who live in streets named after Prince Andrew, looking to change the name of the road or the court or the avenue that they live in. And some of those people who've been told, oh, sorry, nothing can be done, have taken matters into their own hands. But the point is that the Queen somehow, through the force really of her own personality, and that's what I want to talk about in this video, the Queen, through the force of her own personality, managed to keep the show on the road, managed to just about hold the discipline together, and managed to just about, well, more than just about, managed to maintain exceptional popularity figures throughout her reign. There were moments, right? There was the Diana moment, most famously, a bit more than the moment, where her popularity crashed. But the Queen always was able to recover it. And I think this was partly because of the way she behaved, the way she carried herself, the fact that her spouse, Prince Philip, was very much the disciplinarian, the iron will of the iron rod of the family. Charles, by contrast, has never been anything but out of sync with popular opinion. And it's really interesting when you look at every stage of his life, every stage of his career, from probably the only time he was really genuinely very widely popular was at the beginning when he was married to Princess Diana. Then when he split up with Diana, and it emerged that one of the major reasons for Diana's profound unhappiness in that marriage was that he was having an affair before and during and after that marriage with Camilla Parker Bowles. Camilla has never been accepted by the British people. Still to this day, she has absolutely terrible popularity ratings. They forced her to become queen, having made a great fuss about how she was never going to be queen. She was going to be princess consort and all this kind of thing. Ultimately, Charles sort of rammed that through, forced her to be queen. Really, Queen Camilla is the queen that nobody in the United Kingdom asked for. And then, when he became king, he made this extraordinary decision to try and rehabilitate Andrew. And this is what the people who want to blame the Queen very conveniently gloss over. They gloss over the fact that from the first day of his rule, Charles spent significant political capital trying to bring Andrew back in the fold. Now, those of you who've watched me and heard me talk about this before know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about inviting him to Christmas, inviting him to walk to church with the family, inviting him to Easter with the family, inviting Sarah Ferguson to come and spend Christmas at Sandringham with the family, inviting Sarah Ferguson, a woman who hasn't worked for the royal family for 30 years, to walk to church with the family. Why was Charles doing all this stuff that his mother had very clearly set her face against? In the last year of Queen Elizabeth's rule, we saw a system of how Andrew was to be treated. He was made to go, he was invited to Sandringham to join them at lunch, but he was not allowed to appear in public with them. He had to go to a different church service early in the morning. It was a very practical solution from Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. But Charles wanted to be seen as the great convener. He wanted to be seen as the great healer. And in the service of this, he even worsened the rift with his own son by forcing William and Catherine to drive Andrew to church at Balmoral in the summer of 2023. Now, William has his differences with his father, which I am one of the few reporters that you will actually read about the tension and the conflict between those two men. If you want to read the English newspapers, you'll believe that everything's marvellous and they're having strategy retreats in Balmoral. It's pretty far from the truth, but that's a story for another day. But what happened after Charles tried to force them to look like they supported the rehabilitation was that they broke ranks and they briefed that they had been obliged to do it, that they had been ordered to do it, and they had been left with no choice. Because remember, as I often tell people, the royal family is a military organization. It is based upon military structures. You have to obey orders. You have to follow the orders of your superior. That is the rules of being part of the royal family. Them's the rules, and William knows it and he follows it. It doesn't mean, by the way, you can't complain about it in the officer's mess afterwards, or in this case, in the pages of the Daily Mirror, which is where they first made their dissatisfaction with being recruited into Charles's project to rehabilitate Andrew be known. What was so, I think, incredibly, and because people have said to me, and the reason why I'm talking about this is because somebody said to me when I wrote this story about Andrew not leaving Royal Lodge until October, which came out in a parliamentary question the other day, a parliamentary inquiry is going on into the entire settlement of royals at the Crown Estate and what they're paying and what they're living off. Because it's also come out that Prince Edward, who lives in an arguably even more splendid home than Prince Andrew called Bagshot Park, is also paying rent of, guess what? Guess how much rent he's paying, guys? That's right, 1 peppercorn. Yes, I know. I wish I could get rent of 1 peppercorn. It'd be marvellous, wouldn't it? But so there was this big shock and awe announcement in October that Andrew was going to move out, that he was gone, that he was kicked out of Royal Lodge. And in the briefing notes that accompanied it, it was sent to the Royal Rota, not to me. I used to be part of the International Rota. I was kicked out of it after a disagreement with the King's press secretary. It's all very petty, but I can tell you more about that another day. In the briefing notes that were sent out to the domestic media, to the Royal Rota, as it's called, it said that he would be moved out as soon as is practicable. This was hastily reported to be right away. Then people started saying that it wouldn't be till after Christmas. And the reason that these Rota reporters gave that it wasn't going to be after Christmas was so they wouldn't cross paths on Christmas Day. It seemed like a very, very bad excuse at the time. And now, of course, the truth has come out, as it always does. And the truth has come out that the reason that Andrew doesn't have to leave is because under the terms of the notice that he gave 12 months notice. So he doesn't have to leave there until October 2026. It's pretty incredible. So the palace has continued to peddle this fantasy that Andrew's basically gone. Coaches are briefing, Andrew will be gone. Now they're saying by the end of Q1, maybe Q2, January, February, March, so April. Now they're saying it might be April. So it's gone from being tomorrow to April. And I think we all know where this is going to end. It's going to end in maybe he will move out in October 2026, maybe not. Look, I could be wrong. Maybe Andrew will do the honourable thing and set sail immediately. But I think what's interesting to think about is, why is Andrew delaying? Why is he drawing it out? Why is he stretching it out? And the answer is very simple. It's a negotiation. And as the King's camp said at the time, this is a negotiation because Andrew has an ironclad lease. The King must respect the laws of the country. And what is happening, as I have reported on my Substack, is that Andrew is driving a very hard bargain. He is not going to be satisfied to move to some dog box in Sandringham, because here are the facts. He spent £8.5 million on a 75-year lease for Royal Lodge, a deal that translates to rent of about £113,000. That's about 138,000 US dollars per year, for a mansion that would easily command £1 million, maybe $1.2, $1.3 million annually on the open market, right? Why did he give that up? He gave it up because he was paid. And I have been told that repeatedly by insiders, that there was no way that Andrew was going to give up a valuable lease without being compensated. So I reported on Sunday of last week. Where are we now? I'm confused with Thanksgiving. We're on Wednesday. I'm recording this on Wednesday, December the 3rd, and hoping to get it out later this evening. So I reported on Sunday that Andrew continues to haggle, continues to delay, continues to dig in with stubbornness, cussedness, and continues to reel off demands. Yes, that's right. This man, accused of these terrible crimes, which he denies, who has been brought shame and dishonor onto the royal family on a scale of such a scale that he's become the first royal to be stripped of his title since members of the royal family raised arms in support of the Kaiser in the First World War, is reeling off to his demands of what he wants. Not his hopes, not his requests, but his conditions. As I have reported, he wants a 6 or 7 bedroom house on the Sandringham estate, a driver, a cook, a gardener, and police protection. And you know what? He's going to get it, because the palace should be embarrassed by the scale of the failure of their negotiation. If this is what their negotiation is, they should be absolutely humiliated and embarrassed by it, because there is Andrew sitting in Royal Lodge now. He may sit there. He may choose well to sit there for another 9 months. He is sitting there, and he is the one reeling off the demands, reeling off the ultimatums, exposing, frankly, the King's astonishing weakness. What is also going on at the same time in the coverage of this in the UK is that the people are way ahead of the media. So the media, the Royal Rota, they are very dependent on their access to the royal family. So the Royal Rota is basically a old-fashioned name effectively for a press pool. It's like the White House press pool, right? It's like the people who are allowed into the press briefings at the White House. It's a similar kind of idea. They're a group of journalists who are trusted by the palace, who are given privileged access. But what they're being told is, and they were explicitly told, for example, that if they reported on plans for the King's death, they would be excluded from those briefings. But it's more the implicit threat that if they consistently criticize the King or say that the King has completely messed up this complete negotiation with Andrew, that he's handled the whole situation so badly that the monarchy is at record levels of unpopularity, that the king is clearly weak, clearly ailing, clearly struggling with whatever is going on with his health, and has completely had rings run around him by Andrew and Sarah Ferguson. They're terrified that if they report those things frankly, they'll just be kicked out of the Royal Rota, right? So you're in this weird situation where a lot of the mainstream papers now read like sort of Pravda, and they also read like Pravda in the fact that they have to sneak in the little hints that all is not well. They have to sneak those little things in, the little references to the royal family being of record unpopularity, little references to the fact that the king is not expected to live more than a couple of years. But they can't really voice their criticism in the way that I can. And the other problem is that most people who you will hear talking about the royal family on YouTube or on Substack are outsiders, and they analyze it from what they see on the outside. They've never worked inside the machine in the way that somebody like me has. And what I am seeing happening now is that the readers of the mainstream British media could be excused for thinking that the king has acted, with steely resolve. You may remember me talking about this word steely being used over and over again in the briefings towards the Royal Rota. And that they may be excused for thinking that the king is handling all of this rather wonderfully. And they may be excused for thinking that the king has read the Riot Act to Andrew and kicked him out of Royal Lodge. You won't read in those papers that Andrew is being paid millions of dollars in the form of compensation, in the form of housing, in the form of a pension, in the form of a pension pot, in the form of his daughters getting to keep their royal roles, which is another absolute disgrace and embarrassment. I think that Beatrice and Eugenie York are still going around performing official royal duties. I don't know why anybody would want the children of Prince Andrew representing their charity, but there it is. What I was saying is that the readers of the UK newspapers would be very understandable for somebody who just read the UK newspapers to not understand that the king has been completely outplayed by Andrew yet again. Yes, he's got rid of his titles, he's got rid of his prince, but there seems to be absolutely no sign of a police investigation. And there he is. He's going to be sitting there for the next 9 months, knowing that every week that passes makes his negotiating position a little stronger. And as one of his friends said to me, and yes, Andrew does still have friends. One of his friends said to me, he is giving up the lease on one of England's finest houses and expects to be treated fairly. A former courtier told me, knowing Andrew, this was always going to be about money. Andrew is being bought out of the lease, so he will haggle over every detail. The king, the palace has admitted that Andrew's lease has legal force, that it required negotiation. This is them saying the king cannot force his brothers out. He must persuade him. He must compensate him to leave. The bottom line is that this is a very dangerous moment for the crown. Andrew can sit tight in Royal Lodge another 10 months, making a fool of the king, pushing for concessions, reminding the public that Charles is a monarch whose handling of a succession of crises, not just this crisis, a succession of crises since the start of his reign, has been disastrous. The Andrew saga, for me, is a very clear symbol of a monarch who, regardless of the lease that Andrew may hold, is unable to assert himself through the strength of his character. And I think this is what Diana was talking about in her famous Panorama interview when she was asked, will Charles be a good king? And she said, no, he wouldn't, because she could see that he did not have the strength of character, the force of character to get things done. We all know strong people and we all know weak people. We all know people who are pushovers, who you can get anything by, and we all know people who will not take no for an answer. Whether or not you have a bit of paper saying you can stay here or you can do this or you can do that, if Charles was a strong and ruthless and feared monarch, Andrew would be gone yesterday. And that is the bottom line. I feel that if the king cannot resolve the status of his own brother, who is armed with nothing but an old lease, I don't see how he can hope to confront the far larger problems that are closing in on the institution. The Harry problem, the overall popularity problem, the corruption problem, the Crown Estate problem, the properties problem. There are so many problems now for the family. And because of Charles's failure, because of his weakness, because of his lack of resolve, we are just not seeing the necessary firm hand being taken to addressing these problems. I think it probably is partly his character. I think it probably also has a great deal to do with his health. And I think the time really is coming fast now where insiders at the palace, I think you will start to hear more next year about William taking on a more active role in the management of the monarchy. I don't believe there's any point in calling for Charles to abdicate, because that's never going to happen. That's not how the English system works. It undermines the whole concept of divine right on which the whole thing is based. So an abdication is never going to happen. A regency is an official regency is never going to happen. But we need to start seeing an unofficial regency of the kind that we saw in the last years of Queen Elizabeth's life, when Charles was very graciously by his mother given the opportunity to take over, that all the strategic decisions were rooted through his office. And we need to start seeing something similar happening pretty fast, because the monarchy is already in a massive crisis. And the only reason that it seems that it is not in a massive crisis is because of the craven media not reporting on it, because they're terrified of losing access. But if you look at what people are saying in opinion polls, it's very clear that they have had enough.